Hi there, it's Bronwyn. Welcome back to Before Dieting. Before we begin, thank you for sending in your questions. They really do help shape these episodes. And more often than not, if you're wondering about something, the chances are there's others wondering the same thing. In the many conversations I have with women about repeated weight regain, I keep hearing the same thing. The moment we move the conversation away from weight loss and towards weight regain, they seem to hit the same mental blocks. Weight loss is familiar territory. Women can talk about calories, protein, macros, and they can even explain what they think they should be doing to lose weight. But ask them to think about weight regain and the conversation changes. So when I suggest we need to investigate weight regain using a different line of inquiry, I often get a blank look. And that blank look is usually followed by comments like, "I can hear what you're saying, but I can't quite get it to sink in." Or every time I try to think about weight differently, I just get stuck in the loop of dieting. To me, those responses show just how powerful and deeply ingrained our ideas about weight and food and dieting have become. My answer to shifting the conversation is to keep creating new models and concepts and reframes that help you break out of that old way of thinking, where every weight problem automatically leads to another diet. That's also why I believe understanding repeated weight regain requires a collegial approach. It is the foundational reason I developed the Waiting for Happiness project. And I hope you noticed that I said collegial. I know it's a bit of a word to stumble over, but I use collegial and not collaborative. And I make that distinction because my goal isn't to solve weight regain for you. My goal is to help restore your food autonomy by giving you the tools and confidence to investigate and understand your own experience. Because you are the expert in the one thing that no one else can ever know as well as you, your own lived experience. You know the events, the relationships, the turning points, and the moments that have shaped your life. What the Waiting for Happiness project does is it brings the tools and ways of organising information that help you make the patterns and reasons and therefore the solutions visible. Neither perspective is complete on its own. It's when they're brought together that you start to see the full picture emerge. And that's what this project is really about, not replacing your knowledge with ours, but bringing together different kinds of knowledge to investigate a problem that neither of us can fully understand alone. This episode's a good example of that, because today I'm answering questions sent in by two listeners. They're thoughtful questions, and I suspect many of you have wondered exactly the same things. So let's start with Annie's question. Annie wrote, "I keep hearing you say that it's important to examine what happens after a diet. Can you please explain this?" Annie, first, thanks for the question, because I think it's counterintuitive. When I say the most important part isn't the dieting phase, I don't mean that dieting isn't important. It is. But if you're trying to understand repeated weight regain, the period after a diet often contains some of the most valuable evidence. The difficulty is, it's usually the part that we rush straight past. Whether a diet lasted 3 days, 3 weeks, or until you reached your goal weight, most of us want to put it behind us and move on. If the diet didn't work, we call it a failure. If it did work for a while, we focus on the weight we lost. Either way, we rarely stop and ask, what happened after the diet and what can I learn from it? And it's a question that I think deserves much more attention, because it's often after a diet that important clues become visible. Looking back over the diet, you might notice that you always stop a dieter on day 4. Or when you stop following the diet rules, rebound eating starts. Or maybe even you realise you've been starting a new diet every Monday for years. You might even laugh and say, all diets start on Monday. But you've never really stopped to investigate how that became your pattern. Now, none of those observations explain your weight regain on its own, but each one adds another piece to the picture. And that's where the Waiting for Happiness project takes a slightly different approach. Instead of asking only, did the diet work, we also ask, what patterns keep repeating? And it's a question to shift your attention away from judging the diet to investigating your experience. Because your experience after a diet isn't simply the end of one attempt, it's often the beginning of understanding what keeps recreating the next one. So before you move on to another diet, spend some time investigating the one you've just finished. You may discover that the evidence you've been looking for has been there all along. So the point I'm making here is that there is a period after a diet that can reveal evidence we'd otherwise miss. And that brings me to Sandrine's question, which is a really good example of what I mean. So Sandrine wrote, "Sometimes when I lose weight, I feel uncomfortable when people notice and compliment me. Is this something that's common?" Sandrine, thanks for your question. And no, it's certainly not just you. We're led to believe that losing weight automatically makes us happier, that we'll enjoy the compliments, that we'll feel the confidence and finally feel comfortable in our own skin. And let's face it, for many women, that is what happens, but not for everyone. Some women discover that losing weight feels quite different from what they'd expected. Instead of enjoying the extra attention, they find themselves feeling more self-conscious, more visible, and often vulnerable. This is a good example of what I was talking about in Annie's question. It's the sort of discovery that only becomes visible when you take the time to investigate what happened after the diet. And as I've already said, most of us never take that time and never do that. But once the weight starts coming back, we tend to assume we already know what happened. We blame ourselves, promise to do better next time, and begin looking for the next diet. But if you pause for a moment and stay with that period, instead you may notice things that you hadn't recognized before. It's not about just what you were eating, but what you were experiencing. If you've been listening for a while, you might recall a few episodes ago, I spoke about Elise, who had successfully lost a significant amount of weight. And on paper, everything looked like a success. She reached the weight she'd been working towards. But when she looked back at what happened after, she realized she'd never felt comfortable with being noticed, that the weight had allowed her to blend into the background. And without it, she felt exposed. So for her, returning to the previous weight also returned something she'd never realized she'd been relying on, and that is it brought back a feeling of safety. Now again, that's not everyone's experience. The point is to become curious about your own explanation. And so this is why I encourage women not to rush past what happened when a diet has ended. That period will hold important clues that help explain why weight keeps coming back for you. And those answers won't be found in a diet. So if you can start paying attention to that phase after the diet has ended, you may discover you've been overlooking some of the most valuable evidence all along. So to sum up, today's two questions were really asking about the same thing from different directions. So Annie's question asked, why is it worth looking at what happens after a diet? And Sandrine's question showed us that one example of what can be discovered when you do. I think it's an important reminder that repeated weight regain isn't explained by a single event, decision, or diet. It's usually the result of many experiences that have gradually been connected over the course of a lifetime. And that's why understanding it takes time. It takes a willingness to push past the stock standard answers that your brain keeps serving up and look beyond what happened during the diet and become interested in what happened right after it. Now, if today's episode has sparked a question of your own, I'd love to hear from you. You can send all your questions to hello@waitingforhappiness.com.au. The link is in the show notes. And while I can't answer every question individually, many of them become the starting point for future episodes, because I can guarantee if you're asking it, the chances are many other women are wondering the same thing too. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk with you next week.